the new digital media has given journalists powerful new tools to reach millions of people, but has also created serious new dangers. In the vast ocean of the web, news has become just one form of content among many others. And it's almost inextricably mixed with entertainment, political propaganda, and commercialism. Clearly, this poses dramatic challenges to the journalistic profession. Is it still possible to be a journalist in the traditional sense when one is constantly under pressure to deliver as many clicks as possible? How can journalists remain faithful to their professional vocation while working in a social environment that is becoming more politicized and more commercialized every day? Recently, Pope Francis pointed out that, quote, "There are huge economic interests operating in the digital world, capable of exercising forms of control as subtle as they are invasive, creating mechanisms for the manipulation of consciences and of the democratic process. The way many platforms work often ends up favoring encounters between persons who think alike, shielding them from debate. These closed circuits facilitate the spread of fake news and false information, fomenting prejudice and hate. The proliferation of fake news is the expression of a culture that has lost its sense of truth and bends the facts to suit particular interests." End quote. Crossroads has invited two distinguished journalists from the New York, New Jersey area to discuss their experiences working as reporters in this new world and to tell us how they are able to stay faithful to their professional commitment to serve the public with true news. Rob and Gaby Fisher is the New York Times best-selling author of After the Fire, a true story of friendship and survival, The Woman Who Wasn't There, and The Boys of the Dark, a story of betrayal and redemption in the Deep South. She is a two-time finalist for the Pulitzer Prize in feature writing and a member of the Pulitzer Prize winning team at the Star-Ledger. She teaches journalism at Rutgers University in Newark, New Jersey. Her newest book, Fields of Grace, is available fall 2019. Mary Romano is a reporter and editor with long tenures at Bloomberg News and the Wall Street Journal. She has covered a number of beats, including arts and entertainment, investing, and the courts. She is currently an editor at Barron's, the financial weekly based in New York, and she lives in Brooklyn. Welcome to Mary and Robin.
Thank you.
So we'll start the conversation with Robin. Robin and Mary are longtime friends and also longtime journalists. And we thought the best way to begin this evening is to hear from both of them as they question each other about their experiences being journalists in this field, and then we'll open it up to the audience for questions.
Okay. Hello. It's nice to see you all. Thanks for coming out. I'm a purist when it comes to journalism. I believe in facts. It's the facts. We were talking before, I don't need someone on television to tell me how to think. All I want is for them to give me facts and let me make up my own mind. I think sometimes journalists sell the rest of us short. For instance, we're all pretty smart people, right? We can figure things out on our own if we have the information. Am I supposed to be talking about this now or myself? I'm sorry.
You could start with yourself and then you can...
Oh, okay. I hate talking about myself, but okay. I started out as a reporter when I was young, and I hit many bumps in the road, and I learned to be, I think, a really good journalist through experience. I was fortunate enough to get some really amazing projects when I was working at the Star-Ledger, which got attention with Pulitzer, and that got the attention of a publisher in New York, and that's how things worked out for me. I've been very, very fortunate. My first book was a New York Times bestseller. And so I decided to leave the newspaper where I was because it was 2008 or 10, I can't remember anymore, and newspapers were just starting to fall apart. And so I saw the handwriting on the wall, and I thought, if I'm going to go for a career in books, now's the time. And so I did, with the encouragement of my agent. And at the same time, someone from Rutgers called and asked if I'd be interested in teaching one class in narrative journalism. I said, sure. I'd never taught a thing in my life. I did. I fell in love with the students, and I've stayed there. So I write books and I teach. my newest book, I'm just going to tell you really quickly. Actually, the book that is listed here was published a few years ago, right?
Oh, yes.
Fields
Yeah.
of Grace. But the one I'm working on right now, it's fascinating. It's the story of Paul Holes, who is the forensic detective who recently solved the Golden State serial killer case, which was a cold case for 30 years. He killed dozens of people. It turns out he was a police officer, and Paul Holes used genealogy combined with DNA, which has since then become a really big issue, and to solve the case. It was the first time it had ever been done. Now it's changed the way homicide investigations are done. He's brilliant, he's fascinating, and I love doing this book. So that's what I'm doing now.
So do you want to tell us a little bit about your friendship with
Oh, Mary.
And with Mary, and
Yes. Mary and I met, it was your first newsroom, my first newsroom.
Yes.
I started a little later than Mary, like 12 years later in the career. But we were the same type of journalist, and we hit it off. We had great chemistry. We went separate ways after that initial newspaper, but we stayed best friends for 30 years. We've been best friends. Mary went to New York. I took a different path. Mary went into business and financial reporting. I would prefer to cover murder, and so, but we've remained best friends, and I think we're very similar as far as our beliefs in journalism.
So can you tell us what those beliefs are? So we're looking at the vocation of journalists and what it means to be a journalist in this age of fake news. You say that you both consider yourselves similar in the regard of approaching journalism. So what is that? What does that mean?
Well, I consider myself very fortunate in my career because I worked for outlets like the Wall Street Journal, Bloomberg, and now Barron's, which is owned by Dow Jones and the Wall Street Journal, that are sticklers and purists for the truth and sticking with the facts. Even now, when I'm editing, I'm mostly in an editing role now, and I'll have a story, on IPOs or Boeing or the latest financial news, and all there will be lines in there, and I'm like, say to the reporter, who said this? Oh, who do you want to attribute this to? Was it an analyst who's covering the company? No, actually, that's just my thoughts. I'm like, I'm not really interested in your thoughts. If you want to write an editorial, you can, but let's stick with the facts. And that is, so that, I guess, is always, what I say to reporters is, when they have a story and there's all jumble of facts or this point of view or that, I'm like, what do you know? What do we know? And that's what we go with.
Why is it so hard?
Well,
Why is it, from what you're saying, it seems like it would be so easy, just go with the facts, but actually it's not.
well, nowadays it's not. I mean, I think we have an administration that that has to be fact checked at every moment. There's a lot of spin, in terms of so big companies have public relations firms that will that they will just tell you what, or they'll try to put their spin or their take on the story. The company is doing this, the company is not profitable, or the company lost $30 billion, or, so you can't really put a positive, so you have to kind of suss out what is, it is more today, what is factual and what isn't. And sometimes it's what's spin, they're just distorting it.
And sometimes it's also journalists injecting themselves into a story and an issue. Sometimes they may not even realize it. So some of the things that you read, perhaps, and you feel like there's a slant to it, there usually is. I think that turns people off. They know that, they feel that. It causes mistrust, I think. I learned a lesson when I was just starting out, and it is that it was this. I it was a small story in a small newspaper, and there was a family who was driving down this country road, and the father got distracted and he veered into the other lane, and the whole family was killed. He drove into a truck. The whole family. It was 2 little girls and their parents, and they were killed. And my editor said to me, "I want you to cover the funeral." And I was so, this young reporter, I knew it all, right? Oh, I know better than you. And I said, I'm not going to cover that. And she said, "Well, yes, you are." To make a long story short, I went and covered it, and I had an attitude because I thought I knew better. And rather than get it right, what I did was someone told me, because we were at the funeral home, and the hearses were lined up, and you couldn't see what was happening behind the hearses as the bodies were brought out of the funeral home into the hearses. And somebody on the street said, "Oh, isn't that sad to see those 2 little caskets?" And so I wrote, because I was so arrogant and wasn't thinking about, these are real people I'm writing about, you better get it right. I wrote that this was such a sad scene, I didn't see it. The next day, the family called my editor and said, "There were no 2 little caskets. Those little girls were buried together." I'm going to choke up thinking about it. In 1 casket. That changed my entire life, my entire career. I thought to myself, wow, these are real people I'm dealing with. This isn't a game. This isn't an exercise in writing and being a cool journalist. These are real people. And that changed my career forever. I mean, 35 years later, there is not one fact I don't check and double check and triple check and still lose sleep all night long thinking, did I get it right? Did I get it right? Because whether it's Donald Trump or this family who lost their lives, they're people. And our job is to get it right. And so I always try to apply that to everybody, even though all people are not equal and people have agendas. But if you're telling the truth, just tell the truth, it'll be all right.
Can you expand on that a little bit? As a journalist and what you're saying, we're dealing with real people, and how that experience or that relationship that you have with the characters in these stories that you're telling, how does that change for you the way that you look at your vocation as a journalist? Versus just looking at things as facts and looking at things as a human relationship.
I always say I'm a person first and a journalist second. And we both have a lot of empathy. And so there's a saying that, you never get too close to your subjects. But the kind of stories I write, you're dealing with, for instance, kids who were burned nearly to death and trying to survive in a burn unit. You're dealing with men who were in a reform school and raped and murdered in some cases. So if you can't feel for people like that, then there's something missing. So you can still feel for people and have tremendous empathy for people and situations, but still tell a true story. For instance, one of the young men that I wrote about in After the Fire was this beautiful boy in school, and sweet boy, but he was burned, seared, over 66% of his body in this arson fire. He was no longer a beautiful boy. He was melted wax. He had a girlfriend when the fire started. The girlfriend left him because she couldn't get used to, which is completely understandable, couldn't get used to her beautiful boyfriend not looking that way anymore. I felt that it was very important, because we were telling the story of burns, it was important to include that part of the story, because as the nurses and doctors say, in a burn unit, people, they leave their husbands and wives because they can't deal with this, the change in appearance, the change in everything. Alvaro, didn't want me to write about that. And so we talked about it, and I explained to him why I thought it was so important. But at the same time, he was more important to me than the story. He really was. And I think he sensed that. in the end, he decided, yes, I agreed to tell the real story of Burns, and so we came to an agreement. I always have thought my job as a journalist was probably to write about that no matter what. Had he said that will ruin my life, I couldn't have done it. And I know I couldn't have done it. That's a little different reporting, though, than covering an official or...
Well, I started teaching a beginning journalism class at Rutgers, and my first couple of weeks, the first thing I started, I didn't start with the AP style, or I didn't start with writing exercises. I started with interviewing. The first thing you have to do is talk to people. And the first assignment I gave them was, they have a press conference with the governor of New Jersey, and it's about gun reform. And so we practiced on each other, and some of them were very deferential, and then some of them were pretty, going after the governor. And I said, okay, now your next one is, Serena Williams. She, right after the, at the U.S. Open, she had lost. You're the sports reporter. You're going to the press conference. Now it's a public figure, still a public figure. But now you have to. How are you going to ask her how she feels about losing? Was it to like a 17, the 19-year-old?
Yeah.
And she was going for her the Grand Slam, stolen from her, and.
No opinions, please.
No opinions. And she and so, and we practiced. Every single student, I was like, I'm Serena, so you're at the press conference, and I'm right in front of them, and they had such empathy, and they had such and they were so wonderful. And then the next one was on 9/11, and I said, you got an assignment today. You have to go to the memorial, and not really. I said, you have to go, and now it's years later, but still, and people are showing up, but you have to walk up. You're going to walk up to strangers, and how are you going to introduce yourself, and what are you going to say? Now that's your assignment, and we practice, and I'm like, I'm the person, I'm the, I'm a relative of someone who died. And this is like, we spent entire classes just practicing on how you would introduce yourself, what you would say, and they were all so really wonderful. But I wanted to instill in them very early, it's how you approach things. It is a person first, and there might be times where you might, maybe not the governor, the governor, right. You might have to, he is a public figure. And we have to keep them accountable, and there are different ways to approach it. So, but that's how I started my class.
I remember a story with Governor McGreevey. Do you all know who that is? The former governor of New Jersey, and Governor McGreevey was very amiable. Is he affiliated with this, by the way? he's Catholic, but he was a very amiable, friendly man who called everybody with nicknames. He always called me Rob. But he set me up one time, and he was running for governor, I think. I can't remember exactly. But he had been married, and his wife vanished, just disappeared, his first marriage. And everybody was asking him, what happened to your wife and daughter? They moved back to Canada. And he would always just say, oh, we're going to get back together, after the election. And nobody could put their finger on, there was something not right here. And so I kept at him and spent many, many days and evenings with him. And he finally said to me, listen, Rob, because I trust you, I am going to let you talk to my wife. And I said, great. And so he, after the debate one night, he had me come upstairs. She was already on the phone. His handlers were around. And he handed me the phone and he said to her, okay, tell Rob now that we're going to get back together, and we have a great relationship. It was truly amazing, because when I got her on the phone, I said hello and introduced myself, and I said, I understand you're getting back together. And she said, I'm in Canada and he's there. Does that tell you something? And I said, what does it tell me? Tell me. And he is this close to me, right here, trying to hear everything that's being said, trying to control her, talking in the background, encouraging her, oh, tell Rob about when we did this and we did that. And meantime, she's signaling to me, there is a reason I'm not there, and it's not a good reason, and it's not a happy reason. So I said, may I talk to you at another time? And she said, yes, you may. So I decided to do that, and I got off the phone, and he said to me, you're the only person I would have ever let speak to her, because I trust you, and I know you'll get it right. And I set this up because she wouldn't have talked to anyone if I hadn't called her first. And I said, okay, thank you very much. And as I was going down the escalator, I saw Abby Goodenough from the New York Times going up the escalator, and he was on the phone. Sweetheart, I told Abby you're the only one I'll let her talk to. And I wrote the whole thing. I wrote the entire thing in the story, because I thought, that's the truth. I didn't have any bad feelings about him, but he was a fraud, at least at that point in his life. Maybe not anymore, I don't know him anymore, and people evolve and change. He might be a really nice man, but that was deceptive, and I thought people needed to see that side of someone. It was the truth, right?
So I want to bring it back to the topic of fake news. And
Oh, sure.
We're talking on this of your interaction, a small interaction, but an interaction that led you to write the story.
Mhm.
So how do, and this is for both of you, how do we look at this age of fake news? How do we understand what is fake news, in that what is a story that is totally fabricated and totally made up, versus a story that's filtered through our own human bias, right? Because we're human, we have our an innate filter. So what you see as something that may be beautiful, I may see something that may be ugly, right? So, and it may be the same thing. So how do we understand, first of all, what fake news is versus bias, and how do we look at that? How do we move forward?
Well, I think it's very difficult. There's a whole organization that I have friends who work there. It's called First Draft. It's a nonprofit, and all it does is go and it teaches newsrooms how to look for fake news, how to spot a fake video, how to spot fake photographs, but it could be even something as simple as a press release. We have there at Bloomberg. If we got a press release, you didn't just write. You called the number, or you got the number of the corporate headquarters, and you called them to verify, is this from you? You would not believe how many times, like fake news, they tried just even through a press release.
You mean it wasn't really them?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, it's just, they're,
Whoa.
yeah,
That's
they're
bad.
just like, Disney decides it's shutting down its Disney Plus streaming service, like it's new, and that's, and it's like, oh my God, this is like big new, that streaming service that they just unveiled, I'm making that up,
Yeah.
but it's something like huge, and, yeah.
Ooh, that's scary.
And I do think, I think it is harder, and there is a bias, and I guess I kind of question how much of, maybe how much of a slant there has to be. I think we have an administration right now that you have to fact check everything. I was saying it earlier.
That's a fact.
But that's
Yeah,
a
that
fact.
is a fact.
There's a fact. There's a guy at CNN who that's his whole job. All he does is fact check. And the media got tripped up, I think, very early in Trump's presidency, where he would say something and they would just report it until they figured out that it wasn't true. But then they would add on, President Trump said this. without offering proof. They always added that on, and
On the other hand, I'm trying to show both sides, is.
Good journalist.
Yes, on the other hand, I was just saying to Mary and Alexi, I was watching, every chance I get, I'm watching the impeachment testimony. And these are people, at least from my perspective, I'm watching them, and when you're a career journalist, you learn to sort of sense if someone's telling the truth, right? These are people who are just trying to tell the truth, these people who are testifying, I think. They're supposed to have a loyalty to Trump. They don't. And you can see them trying to answer completely truthfully, not one side or the other. They're just, I want to tell the truth. So for instance, I was saying before, I was watching and one of them said, and I'm going to get the exact details wrong, the transcript of the conversation in question, July 25th, that was put in a separate, what was it put in? A separate place, a secret place. And was that unusual? And the witness said it wasn't common practice. However, no, it didn't set off any alarms. It wasn't unusual. But then all I read was, this is highly unusual. And I was saying to them, that's not what I heard with my own ears. I heard one side. I didn't hear the rest. And that really bothered me. And I teach my students all the time, read the New York Times, read the Wall Street Journal, which I think is pristine pretty much. Read, not the editorial pages, the front page, read the real news. If you need to watch all of the 24-hour news channels, watch all of them. Get all this information and then decipher. You can do it yourself. You don't need someone telling you what to think. And I have to say, more than ever, I can read a slant in the media, and it makes me mistrust. It really does. I saw it with my own eyes during these hearings, and I was honestly astounded. I thought, oh my goodness, I just watched that, and that's not what I heard, or that's half of what I heard, and that really troubles me. So I do think the media, since the Trump administration, because he does put out so much misinformation, and because he has such an adversary relationship with the media, fake news, he doesn't like reporters, I think there is a bias, and I don't like that either.
well, and I offer as an example, if I am a reporter, political reporter, and I get information, I get a trove of emails that show, Stephen Miller has, a lot of, or writings and emails about his favoring and recommending white nationalist websites. Is that a bias? And I write about it, or is it fact?
No, that's a real story. That's fact.
It's not bias?
No.
No, it's bias.
It's bias?
You think that's bias?
Yeah.
Yeah, you do.
Well, that's a big topic. What is
Yeah.
deemed to be white supremacy or white nationalism? There's a bias as to, someone could be talking about Western civilization and they're a white nationalist.
Yes,
and that's
we
not
were
the
talking
case.
about that too. It's the way you label things.
Yeah,
That's,
I mean,
that's
it's a big
right.
problem. Yeah.
Yeah,
It's a
but
big
but nowadays there are a lot of dog whistles. White civilization, they're dog
Even the
whistles.
concept of a dog whistle is a controversial one.
Right, exactly.
No, I'm saying,
That's true.
When right.
yeah, it's
And
a
you have
mess.
even, yeah.
I mean, we're so fractured.
Yeah.
That's basically the problem.
That is.
And even Bill Maher the other night said, we've got to, we're getting to the point of a civil war where
Right.
each side believes a victory by the other side is an existential threat.
That's right.
And you can't operate within that.
I agree.
Because people feel an imperative to spin something because they feel it's a moral obligation, and they're spinning it. And then there's someone on the other side who, has a different perspective and feels as if, there's a bias,
Yeah.
that they're at a disadvantage, and that's why they'll vote for Trump. That's, many people pointed out, whether it was, the filmmaker, documentary filmmaker, Michael
Michael
Moore and
Moore.
others, that there was a large group in the country who felt, overlooked, or,
Yes.
and that was their
Mhm.
backlash.
Yeah, that is the.
So I mean, I'm sorry, but it's,
No, it's fascinating. It's a
Yeah.
fascinating topic. But I mean, if everybody, in a perfect world, right, we would be able to write compelling stories without bias and trust that people, I mean, it's almost impossible to be a thinking human being and not have a bias, but you have to check it. You just have to check it when you're a journalist. If you're a great journalist, you have to do that.
Because you guys have been in the industry a long time. I started out in journalism and went over to the business side. I mean, from
Mhm.
college, I was journalism. And it seems one of the big problems since the internet, I mean, you work for legitimate news organizations. There's so many
Oh.
online publications that have arisen during this advent of the web that are really just opinion. There's so much less actual reporting.
Reporting.
That
Very true.
That
it's
is true.
refreshing
That is
when,
true.
when you actually see reporting. And
I
that's
agree.
why, even though I disagree with their slant, like Vice Media, I don't know, if, I really like the fact that they would do a story about, the far right in Europe, and you would actually have a 20-minute interview with Marie Le Pen.
Right.
They would go, and you don't get that
No,
really
you
on
do not
TV.
get that.
And you
No.
don't get that on these online journals. So the
Yeah.
lack of actual reality,
Mhm.
encountering reality, that's a fundamental problem
Mhm.
when it's really just glorified opinion.
Well, even social media on tweeting, you can have an account, an anonymous account, and you could just be
Yes.
spewing.
Yes.
And the same in comment sections, that's why, for a long time, Bloomberg News, they didn't allow any comments on their stories on the website.
I mean,
Too much,
why should people
Fake
be allowed
hatred.
anonymous comments? If you have a real opinion and you want to present it, why not have to put your name to it, right? I mean, there are no rules. There are no.
I have a question because I hear obviously politics, which is a highly dividing topic, especially at the
Yeah.
moment, and I hear social media, which is the arena of being able to say anything behind the screen. But I also feel that I'm not a journalist. I work in technology, but for a consumer goods company. And it feels like the same is happening at work. So very often I don't know who can I trust and who I cannot trust.
True.
My CEO, to whom I report sometimes, calls me because she feels she's given, different advice and she's been managed. And so, I mean, where does this lack of love for truth comes from? It does not come from politics. Politics is a field of application of that,
Mm-hmm.
but it doesn't come from that.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't come from the social media. Are we becoming as human more disaffectionate to the truth, to manipulate reality to our liking? And why? I mean, I don't know if you have a point of view on that.
I think we're so polarized that we're not listening anymore to each other. As we said before, you tend to go to the source that is telling you what you want to hear. It's no different than you're at work and someone's telling you what you want to hear. You don't know who to trust because there is no truth in that. There is, right? This is what I believe, and I'm not going to consider any other point of view. I'm going to keep going down this alley. And how can you possibly be well informed if you are only listening to that, right?
I agree, it is very polarized, and we're not listening to each other. And I found myself really troubled by, when the riot in Charlottesville with Trump saying, there were good people on both sides.
Yeah.
That's a lie. That's a lie. I'm sorry, and I'm very deeply troubled by things that this administration says and does.
Oh, I think a lot of people are. I think many, many people are. I think someone should take his Twitter account away. That would be really helpful to bringing us maybe to talk. Because people really are afraid to say what they think. I think an awful lot of us feel pretty much the same way about things, but you're not allowed to even veer off a little bit in your opinion, or your best friend or your colleague may disown you. I think it's that polarizing. It's almost like you're afraid to say what you're thinking. It has to be, you have to toe that line, whatever that line is. That's frightening. I think that's frightening.
But is it true also in your newspaper or in your being journalist? Meaning, is your editor in this way? Whatever your editor
That's
is.
a good question.
The editors, I'm sorry.
No, because in a certain way I can be afraid to say something different if I am around the table with my family, with my friends, my colleagues. But at a certain point you are in a certain way in front of your computer, you have to write something and it goes on the newspaper.
Yeah.
So are you free to say what you really think?
Well, as a journalist, you're
Yeah.
not supposed to be. I mean, if you're...
Well,
No, but
it's even supposed to be. So my question is it really?
If you...
I don't know, in your experience,
Yeah. If you're not writing for the editorial page, or writing an opinion, you're not allowed to express your views.
You're talking about in a meeting, in your internal meetings?
Oh,
No. When you have to write a piece,
yeah,
as a
no.
journalist, are you free to really write what you really think? Or in a certain
no.
way, this type of bias, this type of pressure, this type of polarization
The most
enter
respected
into your
ones
work?
still, like, they will present both sides.
Absolutely,
I think they still present both sides, so it is,
absolutely.
like I see in the New York Times and
Wall Street
and
Journal.
Wall Street Journal as well, they do present both sides.
Mhm. Yeah, they do, and that's good journalism. It's not good journalism when you inject your opinion into something when you're supposedly a balanced journalist. It's not good journalism. Right for the opinion page.
Other questions?
Yes.
Where is the best place to go to check facts?
That's a really good question. Mayor, what's that?
Well, they're at CNN,
It's
go on
hilarious.
CNN and look for that his name is, I can give you his name, and all he does is check facts.
He checks facts.
And he's really great, and he's really wonderful. I will find that and I will get you his name.
There
'Cause
are
I think he should
also,
be followed.
there are websites, if you do fact check websites, there are quite a few of them, and most of them are really legitimate and very, very good.
I think there's a website called ProPublica,
Mhm.
and they do a fantastic job. All they do, like when it comes to, like when there's a big news event for elections, all they do is, if there's something that, was going on in immigration, it's here are the facts. I think they do a fantastic job.
In a different way, when you're talking about network news, one of the most credible journalists out there is David Muir on ABC. I mean, he's 30 minutes, but when you talk to people in the business, he is like revered because he is such a great reporter. He doesn't show bias whatsoever. He's just a fabulous journalist, as Diane Sawyer was before him. She kind of handpicked him for that job. But I mean, as far as TV news, you just don't get any better than someone like David Muir. David Sloan is the executive producer of a lot of their news shows, and even he says he is pristine, David Muir. So I trust him, I will watch him. But the 24-hour news channels, I can't. I just can't, right? I feel like I'm listening to 3 different stories when I tune them all in. Some don't even resemble the other,
Right.
because it's entertainment. TV is entertainment.
Well, I think Fox is more entertainment. And I think like MSNBC, I think there's a couple of them they're all they do is screech,
Yeah. Yeah.
and so I guess it's a form of entertainment.
I guess, if you like that. Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, I mean, no, I think most of them come under entertainment divisions,
Yes,
right?
yeah,
So
yeah.
they're entertainment. You have people who are actors presenting stories, right? Not you, I'm not talking about real news reporters. I'm talking about these entertainers.
I have a question, sorry. I hope I can say it in a more clear way, but how do you think that nowadays that expansion of media, like so for example, or media platforms or pages like Facebook and Twitter and TV, and still the TV, right, or internet itself, is influencing the people, the information that people are receiving also, and also that first hand that they can have of a news. Because, for example, some people might think, oh no, after work I'm just going to go home and watch the news. Or I'm just going to go home and then watch my Facebook. And now Facebook has all this politics, posts, Instagram or whatever, all this other account. So you're actually exposed, and you're like having media. You have tablets, you have cell phone, you have everything now, laptop, and you have access to information like that. But it's not the same as going to a protest of seeing the point of view of some people, in the street, coming here and listening to this. So I got the feeling that people are losing that firsthand sense. Yeah, exactly. So how do you think this changes like the way of, it is influence, right? How do you
Sometimes you like on Facebook you can't even tell what is the fake.
I closed my account 3 times already. The Facebook, and then I opened it again because I was
you can't
so
even tell
tired.
what is fake. And and some of these sites are being done out of Eastern Europe.
Yes.
Or they're being done out of a small apartment in in Kansas. The New York Times did like a really great series, and it was on video, and it's like their video called The Weekly, and it was just about it was a husband and wife team, maybe out of Missouri, out of their basement in Missouri, and all they did was make up stories. And they just, put them online.
They were well written, but they weren't true. I think you'd be stunned if you spent a period in a university class and heard what young journalism students think is real news and where they got it. How do you know that's a fact? I know it's a fact because my friend saw it on Facebook and then checked it on Twitter, and we looked it up again on Instagram. But who gave you that information? Was it a credible news source? To the point where one of my classes a few semesters ago gave me a black sweatshirt that said, is it a credible source? Because they don't understand what a credible source is anymore.
Because
They don't.
And just to re-emphasize the question, nowadays with technology, artificial intelligence, you can even reproduce somebody who is not that person saying whatever you like.
That's right.
So the moment I cannot even trust, how do you know it's a fact? I saw him saying that.
Yeah, well, it's not him.
Other than it's not him.
Yeah.
So
Isn't that horrifying?
You guys are in the sector, but if you put yourself in our shoes,
I do all the time.
It's
So do you,
like-
Mary.
almost impossible. And also for the job I do and for what I was saying before, sometimes you can even say the truth, but show only one part of the facts.
That's right.
Not saying your example before of the sentence, not saying the full sentence. It creates the total opposite understanding.
It does.
So it's super difficult for sometimes for me to form an opinion about something. So what do you think ultimately can help the man on the street really forming an opinion? Because given that ultimately I can't spend my life fact checking,
No.
then what I do, I marry one of the two parts, or how do you think people like common people can form an opinion?
I think that you need to know what credible, legitimate news sources are, even if their opinion pages don't appeal to you. The New York Times, as far as reporting, you may not like a little slant here and there, but they are telling you they are the best reporters on earth, I think. So is the Wall Street Journal, Bloomberg. I mean, these are all really legitimate. The Associated Press, they're fabulous. These are legitimate news sources with real journalists who you can pretty much figure out, yeah, that this is true. This is
I think
real.
it still is most of the more established news sources.
Yep.
And like I said, there could be a few of them that, some of the online ones like ProPublica, they're just online. And they are truly wonderful with just the facts. I get, for me, like when I anything that looks like on Facebook, like I'll see these news feeds, if it looks totally crazy, it just looks at, like whether it's conservative or liberal, I don't even open it, I don't even look at it. Or or something like Breitbart News. If it's online, just go and look at it. It is, I think it's full of hatred. I don't think that it's not news, it's not conservative, it's.
I don't know, I would
It's a
say
dis-
ultimately, you have to do the work.
Well,
Yes.
but
There isn't one,
I agree.
even the New York Times, even the Wall Street Journal, as journalists,
yeah, they've made
you're gonna get it
mistakes.
wrong.
They've made
You're gonna
mistakes.
get it wrong.
That's right.
And ultimately, you have to judge. When you're consuming the news, you have to judge. And so the work is on you as the consumers, right? And which puts the onus on us as journalists, as a vocation, right? Not to give you the opinion, but to lead you to draw an opinion, right? So that's, I would say, for me at least, this is my vocation as a journalist, right? Is to present the facts or present what you're seeing, so that the person who's consuming it reaches his or her own conclusion.
Absolutely.
And this is where,
Unfortunately,
and this
you
is where
will
we
have
get
to
it
do-
wrong.
you will have
And
to
this
do
is where
some
we get
work.
it wrong.
You shouldn't have to do a lot of work, but you do have to do some of
Yeah.
your own legwork yourself.
And
And like, yes, the New York Times, and they do get it wrong, but for the most part.
It's about as good as it gets.
And, right,
as
and
far
it
as
is the
delivering
onus on
information.
us is for those outlets, for the journal, for Bloomberg, is to make a promise to the consumer that we are, we're gonna do everything we can to get it right. And this is why you should be reading so-and-so, or so-and-so, or this outlet or that outlet.
You had a question.
Yeah, what percentage of journalists would you say share your same, I guess, love and respect for putting the truth first? And then secondly, your same love and respect of putting the well-being of the subjects before how good the story is.
When I was sitting in a newsroom, I would have to say, I was sitting between two people who were grandstanders. They would get on the phone and be doing an interview and stand up and walk back and forth. It was like, look at me. There are those journalists. There were more journalists, I think, who truly understood the weight of their responsibility, and they honored that. And if they weren't that way, like me, they learned it along the way. Because most journalists that I know are just great people. They're really great. They want to do the right thing. They're smart. They want to do the right thing. Sometimes we get ourselves in the way. But if you can step back, or you have a good editor who can say, you need to step back here, this is full of opinion. But most journalists really do want to do the right thing, I think.
I agree. I think most really, yes, they do. They want to do the right thing.
Yeah, they're good people who really think, maybe I can make a little bit of a difference by providing this information. That's what it comes down to, I think.
Yeah, I'm really interested in what you guys are saying about how a lot of mainstream media is becoming a form of entertainment. It makes me think about my own experience growing up. Like, I was constantly watching TV, so when I see some big personality on Fox or MSNBC, like, it's kind of catering to, a certain sensibility that's developing. But now I'm starting to see, I mean, Robin knows I work as a high school teacher. A lot of times I'll present something in class that I think is inherently fascinating because there's something true there, there's something actually meaningful. But if I don't present it in a way that's entertaining, you know,
Exactly.
people will fall asleep, they'll take no interest.
Mhm.
And it's, I don't know, like, when I hear you, Robin, talking about, you know, like, writing these stories about everyday people, I'm trying to really present the experience of the individual person. Like, there's something fascinating with it. And it's not really as entertaining as Trump's latest tweet, but again, inherently there's something meaningful there. So, I don't know, I face this question a lot of how do I try to present what is true, what is beautiful to an audience that is kind of not stimulated by things that are entertaining. You know, whether it's in the classroom, whether it's through, you know, journalism. How do you think we can respond to that?
It's a really good question. I hate to sound corny, but I think I've talked to my colleague, Bimbe Bagiyembo over there, who's much younger than me, and we often talk about the generations, and the one thing that seems to resonate with everyone is authenticity. So if you are passionate about something, I think that's contagious. And I think people sense that and they sort of hang on to that and hear your story. So, I mean, everybody, it is true, everybody has a story. Everybody has a story. If you get to know people well enough and you care enough about people, it's amazing. Everyone has amazing stories. But to get other people interested, you have to invest yourself. You really do. You can't just tell a story. You have to be somewhat invested in that person, in that story. I don't know if that makes sense. It's sort of, you know, we're dealing with this all the time, right? I mean, in our college. This is how they walk around, this is how, but it's not impossible to get them, and it's usually about other people, regular people that they want to hear. I think you have to give them a voice too. A lot of times I think as teachers, we try to be, you know, teachers, and that's a good thing, but they also have valuable things to share with us, and I think it's a give and take. I think that helps. Does that help at all? I don't know if I addressed the question, but sort of a passion that comes through, you know?
Yeah. Are there other questions?
I have, is there a place where actually we can go, like, you know how sometimes like architects have association or something like that? Someone, or is it only on a professional level, like on TV channels? I don't know how it works. Or is there a place where if we are interested in sharing, you know, things like this, but in study groups or kind of like these groups, if we can, without going to university and taking classes?
Yeah, yeah.
Or like watching sometimes, you know, they give us free films or something, people talk about a topic. Is there something like that on the field of journalism that we can kind of
Like organizations like the Society of,
SPJ.
Society
or
of
maybe a
Professional
group that you can
Journalists?
follow up about like journalism, things that are going to be presented on the city or something like that, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I do think there's one website you could begin with, and it's called SPJ, Society of Professional Journalists. They often have topics that are of interest that are going on right now. They often have, I don't know if they have events, but
I think they might. They
Yeah,
might.
so, yeah.
it's a good place to start, to find other places. I think there should be more of these kinds of things because I think people have, they misinterpret who journalists are a lot.
Yeah.
And I think once the interaction is there, again, it's communication, right? Then you learn to trust a little more. Like, not everybody's like, I don't know, whoever you don't like, Sean Hannity or Rachel Maddow on the other side. There are most of us who are just trying to do the right thing, and I
You want to
think
feel alone sometimes too. Like,
Yeah.
You do what you're doing. You said the name of it, what was it?
Society of Professional Journalists,
Okay.
SPJ.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
And yeah,
Both Angelos, actually.
Okay, so Angela.
Yeah. I would just throw out an alternative point of view, because I think in terms of how to get to the truth, because I think there is, as well-meaning as journalists are, I think there is a kind of groupthink to the establishment that the alternative way to get to the truth is through the adversarial process of really
you're right.
going, looking for opposite, points of view, extreme points of view, because to be honest, a lot of the dissatisfaction is you do see the demonization of the right and also the left. When
That's
you
right.
have Hillary Clinton saying Jill Stein is a Russian agent.
Right.
I mean, there's a whole left-wing media that's now associated with Russia. I mean, so there are a lot of real problems and there are a lot of faults with that establishment center that has created its own problem. I think that began first and created the backlash, because I come from that world. I mean, I went to an Ivy League school, I worked at Time Inc. There is this idea of like, I don't know anybody who voted for Trump. Well, that's a problem.
That's
That's a
right.
major bubble.
I actually agree with you,
And
yes.
so, I mean, so the problem with going to the credible, yes, in terms of the straight facts, absolutely. You're not gonna find lies in the New York Times. But I have to say, I mean, personally, I go to Wall Street Journal, so I can't read the front page of the Times.
Right.
It's the selection of stories, the slanting of headlines, there's a clear agenda there.
Agenda, yeah, I get that.
And there's so much going on in the world, it's like what you choose to focus on is a form of bias.
That's a form,
Or what you
it's
don't
very
focus
true.
on. So,
You're
I
right.
mean, so I think the only answer is the traditional liberal way, which we've gotten away from, which is to give the, benefit of the doubt to the other side, go out of your way
Yeah,
to,
I do too.
there's a Catholic concept from Thomas Aquinas of the Disputatio, which came out in his Summa, where we'd have the objections, like make the best possible case for the other side. So I think there can be an education to that, to almost like to examine your conscience for your viewpoint. And that's a whole other thing, viewpoint diversity. I mean, there needs to be viewpoint diversity, and it ends up actually respecting the dignity of people, because, it's
right.
love your enemy, like you think your enemy is beyond the pale. Well, guess what? They're a human being also.
That's right.
So, I mean, I think that's a journalistic practice that could be part of journalism. What are you missing? Where's your blind spot?
I
That's all.
think that's absolutely brilliant. I really do. I do. One of the beauties of university life, which is, relatively new to me, is watching young people when you encourage them when you give them a safe space to share their experiences and their feelings about things without feeling like they're going to be attacked. And then when you see that collective become, oh, now I get what you're talking about. Okay, I can understand why you feel that way, because you come from this background, and it's transformative to watch. And I don't think we as adults do that very much. You're wrong. I don't feel that way. I didn't vote for that person. But these kids are more open to hearing each other, which I think is really refreshing. I doubt that it'll last through adulthood, but it
Is
would be
there
nice.
a really respected conservative outlet that is, like publication that
Washington Times?
is the Washington Times or the?
Really asking that question? Sorry. I'm sorry. I mean,
Yes, I am.
yeah, I mean, National Review is
The
very,
National Review, okay,
would be
yes,
one,
yeah,
that's,
National Review.
mainstream.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm sorry,
Yeah.
who else?
Actually, publication I helped one is American Conservative.
Okay.
It has a lot of different conservative voices. I mean, yeah, I think the biggest blind spot in mainstream media was the New York Times and on the, WMDs and the Iraq War.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
that was the American Conservative was started as, to present that point of view. So, but,
I ask that because
Yeah,
Fox
yeah.
News has such a big presence that,
TV, entertainment.
well, that's how,
well, that's another topic.
Yeah.
I think,
Yeah.
you have Chris Wallace. I don't think it's as bad as the
I think Chris
caricature.
Wallace is a wonderful
Yeah,
journalist.
yeah.
But
Yeah,
but
yeah.
there,
That's
I mean,
true.
even someone like Tucker Carlson, he is now getting a lot of publicity for presenting an alternative to traditional republicanism, to recognizing the inequality and the bias. So,
Yeah.
you know, I mean, I think it's just complicated, and you have to go out of your way. But to your point, ultimately, I mean, I work in media on the marketing side.
Yep.
Media is just not going to be the answer. There's just too much media. You know, I mean, years ago, I had the worst experiences with groups commenting by email and debating, and disembodied argument is just the worst.
Yeah, oh,
It's the worst thing. But when you get together with people,
Yeah.
flesh and blood people,
Yeah.
it's different. So I think there needs to be maybe fasting from the media and just consciously staying away. You know, and we're seeing that,
Put us
right?
all out of business.
Yes, please,
And-
stay with us.
I wanted to ask a practical question,
Yeah.
because you are telling that we as the consumer has to do the work. So I'm asking you as a consumer, but also working in that environment, being also journalist. We are not only journalists; we are also consumer. So what's the work that you are doing with respect to when you want to get to the bottom of certain things that are interesting for you, what you do? You know, what type of work you do in front of you wanted to know more about certain topics or certain facts. Because you too has to trust whatever everybody reads, everybody watches, etc. So what is the work? Being inside, you maybe have a little bit of sharper eyes with respect to people that are not journalists. So I'm asking you, what do you do? Before you mentioned, okay, you look this and that and that and that and that. Okay, not necessarily have time to go through 10 different, sources. So it's good enough for me to watch on the same time or check CNN and Fox. And I tend to believe it only to the things that are exactly the same, both sides, because these things are real. If not,
And that doesn't happen often.
the interesting thing is that it's not even the fake news; they are all true. But the selection of what you want to tell me is already
Right.
two different words. They are describing two different words. So, okay, knowing that it's not so easy, that the answer to all this problem is not in the media. But so, what do you do? When you want to have, again, to become certain that you're not going to be completely manipulated with respect to certain things.
Well, I don't think you can ever be completely certain.
No, not completely certain, but not completely manipulated also.
And I think it takes a little bit of work. I mean, I really do. It takes a little bit of, I am going to open my mind and listen to this outlet, and I'm going to read the front page of this, and conversely, I'm going to read the National Review, along with the New York Times, and then, as I said, people are really smart. You can make your own judgments as well as any journalist in a newsroom, right? But just like journalists in a newsroom, you have to do a lot of legwork in order to present a true story, right? You can do less of it by turning to legitimate news sites. I do all of them. I read the Conservative, I read the New York Times, I read the Wall Street Journal. I love the Wall Street Journal. I really do. I love the Wall Street Journal. That is, to me, that is the ultimate newspaper. It's just, I don't read any opinion in there. I just read, this is a really fascinating, well-written story that I want to read. And that's what I want to see.
I think just one little thing too is that I think we have to allow ourselves as journalists to be surprised by the story. So, and by the character. So if you're doing a story on a particular person, and a character in a story, that there have been a couple of times in my short career that I've gone into a story on a particular person, a character that I found that I'm doing a feature story on, a Coming to America story, whatever, where what I thought based on a brief pre-interview and research I've done about this person, after spending an afternoon following the person around speaking, the way I do the story is then completely different from the way I went into it, based on the couple of hours that I spent with that character. And
That's
I
a good
think,
journalist.
yeah, and so I think that, and actually, and it makes it harder, right? Because I want to get it done, I have a deadline, I've done all my research, I'm sure, okay, blah, 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 I'm gonna start this way, I'm gonna start this way, film that, shoot that, done, right?
Right.
5 o'clock, I gotta go.
Yep.
And then I go in and I'm like, oh no.
Yeah, that's not the story.
Actually, it's completely the opposite.
Mhm.
And I think that that's the work, at least for me and for us as journalists, to do, is to, in as much as we can, because we're human and because we're flawed, be surprised. You know, be aware of our biases
Mhm.
and allow ourselves to be surprised by reality, by what we're.
I think that's
To
great.
stay flexible.
Yeah.
You know,
Yes.
really stay flexible, keep an open
Absolutely.
mind.
Don't take
Absolutely.
anything as truth, as, 100% truth always. Be
Yeah,
open to check other points or something.
Right.
Yeah.
absolutely, absolutely. And everybody should talk to each other more without so much harsh judgment, really and truly. I think that's the key.
What are you finding among your students about the whole idea of freedom of speech? That's the scary, that's, I think, a big sea change. I grew up on the left, reading the Village Voice and Nat Hentoff and those types of journalists. And at that time, the ACLU meant defending the right of Nazis to march in Skokie, Illinois. Now now it's progressivism, that's changed. And due process, I think, has changed. So you have people, indicted in the media before that. So,
Yes.
and there was something in the Times the other day, something happened on some campus, and the student journalists
Yes,
had gotten
yes.
quotes.
Yes,
I
so
mean,
it was.
you know the story?
Yes,
Yeah, I mean, that
and
was,
I
that was
taught
scary.
At
yeah.
Northwestern, I taught it I taught it
Yeah.
in the class.
Yeah.
In Northwestern, there was, Jeff Sessions was coming to speak, and then there was a protest. But the students wrote, that the newspaper wrote the story, but then the protesters said, you shouldn't have put our names in and our photos, and the newspaper apologized.
Oh, jeez.
And a lot of the professional media kind of like were tweeting saying, this should be freedom of speech, and so. But I am very happy to say that when I talked to the students, I said, okay, let's break this down. Should Jeff Sessions been allowed to speak on campus? And everyone said yes, of course. They're like, if you don't want to go, you don't go. But it was like I have 25 students.
But wasn't it
and every
Rutgers who turned away Condoleezza Rice? Someone did. Was it Rutgers?
I don't remember.
I thought that was
But
terrible.
these are all undergraduates, and I really thought that for a sec they were going to say, we don't, if you don't, he has no business being on the college campus speaking. But they didn't.
That's great that they said
didn't.
that.
Yes.
They should talk to our chancellor because.
Oh.
You think that your students, it's a self-selected sample, that they're into journalism and?
Well, they're
therefore-
journalism
Yeah,
students.
They're journalism
yeah.
students, yes.
Yeah.
But I mean, among the rank and file students, it's probably, it was kind of interesting. Some of it fell into
Yeah.
the whole Gen Z stereotypes. I've
Yeah.
heard the stories, like they don't like to answer the doorbell. They just do, they just do everything on their phone. And somebody reacted that way in that story, like they were just, they were freaked out because a student journalist called them
They
to get a
called them
quote.
because they used a student directory, and they said, that their privacy
Yeah,
was
like,
being.
why are you contacting me?
Yes.
I mean, I know.
And,
it's a
yeah, so, yeah,
caricature.
it is,
I'm sure it's an exception.
Yes, it was, yes, but these were all journalism
Yeah.
students, and I said, what do you think of that? Should have the student journalist been contacting them? And they said, yeah, that's their job,
Of course, yes, that's it.
is to ask, or to approach people. I'm writing a story, can I interview you?
Yes, absolutely.
Would you mind speaking to me? So yeah, no, I don't know about the extended student body, but.
No.
Yeah. Anybody else have questions? This was so much fun.
Well,
Fun.
thank you very much.